Liber 132, Apotheosis. Freighter 132 is Wilfred Talbot Smith. Note, first part up to section Gamma probably written May 28, 1943. Smith noted on his original copy recorded 7th October 1943, I enclose my notes in square brackets, Richard Kaczynski. Liber 132, May 28, 1943, 3:30 p.m., GMT. Birth of an idea. Horoscope of the above time not copied. CXXXII, or Crowley, making consideration of the true will or destiny of Freighter 132, was haunted persistently by the word apotheosis. The Kabbalistic value of this word is 645, which, added to 132, gives 777. His work had been based on very varied reports concerning Freighter 132, friends, enemies, and critics. He was able to reconcile all the conflicting accounts by this idea. His memory then suggested Louis Bromfield's book, The Strange Case of Miss Annie Spragg. In the deepest purport of this book, he saw an adumbration of the method by which Freighter 132 might come to full initiation, the perfect realization of his self in the free fulfillment of his true will. This came to Freighter 666 as a dazzling light thrown upon this very difficult case. He was impelled to take an omen and then an oracle, and later to set up a genethlical figure. This last heads these remarks. Comment follows in due course. The omen was the 58th hexagram Tui, the watery part of water, and the marriage of water with the sun, the child thereof. Roughly interpreted, this means a pleasing solution and success through the image of his illumination. The oracle was AL chapter 3 verse 18. Now this mystery of the letters is done, and I want to go on to the holier place. Incredibly apt, this might well be the utterance of Freighter 132 at this juncture. The magical ring of Freighter 666 stopped so as to cover the letters N to T in the words on to thee in the manuscript of Liber AL. The word to, tau vav, or tau vav, is the Hebrew aleph tau vav ate, or thou. Nun is Scorpio, and T, or tau, of the, and the teth of Leo. So that those letters might be read thou between the lion and the dragon, or serpent. The 4 letters add to 465, or 5 times 93. And this also, too, 645 added. The result is 1,110. Freighter 132 himself should be very specially qualified to appreciate these Kabbalistic significances, perhaps better than any other member of the order. The horoscope. This is one of the most astonishing fortunate figures that Freighter 666 has ever set up in his whole life. Neptune is 12th exactly on the place of 132's radical, shows the intervention of the masters of the AA. North Node on the cusp of 11th shows the friendly intervention of 666. It is exactly on the place of 666's radical Herschel, his magical will. Venus, the lady of the figure, culminating in Jupiter in the 10th, shows good fortune attending the discovery. Pluto in the 10th may show permanence of the fame attaching to it. Saturn is in the 9th house, philosophy, science, and religion. Sun conjunct Herschel conjunct Mercury support Herschel from the quartile, as does Mars conjunct Moon from the trine aspect. They show the word and the will taking charge of 132's life. Mars conjunct Moon in the house of personal initiation, supported by trine Herschel and V Sun. Herschel Mercury shows 132's energy softened, enlightened, and blessed by the protection of the highest. Freighter 666 has from the beginning been baffled by the extraordinary figure of the heavens at the nativity of Freighter 132. There are no less than 8 planets in close, remarkably close, the limit of divergence is only 5 degrees aspect. And Pluto 3 degrees away, that is 9. It will after appear significant that the only outsider is soul, the human self of Wilfred Talbot Smith. It is perhaps the most important astrological discovery of Frater CXXXII that greatness always accompanies complexes of planets. They stabilize the whole structure, and each enriches the other elements of the complex. A complex of more than 5 planets is rare. Of 8, Frater CXXXII knows only one, William Shakespeare, beside Wilfred Smith. The figure is attached. Note, the figure was not in fact attached, but the place and date of birth of WTS, or Wilfred Talbot Smith, are given as follows. 12:40 a.m., 9th of June, 1885. Tunbridge, Kent. GJY. Yet no corresponding qualities could be found in the man. He has no birth, no breeding, no education. Physically, he is a meager specimen. Mentally and morally, he possesses every vice, every defect conceivable. Spiritually, he has no attainments to his credit. His achievements are null. To set off these flaws, he can boast few virtues. Even his persistence in upholding the order may have been due to self-preservation rather than to loyalty. These facts are patent. Frater CXXXII has set them forth less from personal observation than from the reports of his friends and admirers. Accordingly, the horoscope is completely absurd and nonsensical, indeed a giant's robe upon a dwarfish thief. Yet with all that has been said against Frater 132, there is no doubt that something in him demands and receives the most extravagant, blind, unreasonable devotion. Frater CXXXII was struck, while making these observations, by certain curious parallels between his personality and his effect upon those who know him, and that of Cyrus Sprague, the prophet of Lewis Bromfield's book. This book must be read with very great care, or it will be fatally misunderstood. The key is in the first fact cited by Horace Winery at the end of paragraph 2 of the last chapter. The simple, the astounding truth flooded the mind of Frater CXXXII with light. It explains all obscurities. It reconciles all contradictions. We have all of us throughout been blinded by a single misapprehension, precisely as if a staff of astronomers, mistaking a planet for a star, observed its motion, and so found nothing but irritating, bewildering, inexplicable attacks upon the laws of nature. All became clear on recognizing the fundamental mistake. Wilfred Talbot Smith is not a man at all. He is the incarnation of some god. Liber 132, Dead Reckoning in the Fort, Section B. It having been discerned above in that Frater 132 is an incarnation, not necessarily an avatar of some god, it is expedient to discuss diverse implications of this thesis. 1. The word God implies a fact. It is no question of convenience, as when the Ephesians called Barnabas Jupiter and Paul Mercury. 2. The incarnation of a god is an exceedingly rare event to become known, although frequent enough when he makes it secretly, to take his pleasure on the earth among the legions of the living. It being known, it is important to ascertain his purpose, especially when, as in the present case, the material envelope has been so perfectly constructed that he is himself not fully aware of it. 3. One must distinguish such cases very sharply from that phenomenon in these days so common as to constitute an appreciable percentage of the population, and to exercise notable influence upon society, the incarnation of elementals. Nor is a god here to be confounded with daimon or angel, even although his function wholly or in part proved to be that of an angel or messenger or prophet. Cf. Liber AL, chapter 1, verse 7. There is no reason to suppose that I was, is, or is not a living man. For, by God is to be understood a complete microcosmic individual, as contrasted with human elementals, who incarnate partial planetary or zodiacal intelligences. Note in original, for the general theory, the student may refer to Moonchild, of higher or lower rank in the Yetziratic hierarchies. Such are salamanders, undines, sylphs, gnomes, in human form. 5. It is of the first importance for those who would reap full benefit from the sojourn of such a being on this planet that they should understand his nature. They ought to know his name. Cf. Neophyte's Ritual of Golden Dawn and J.C. Fraser's remarks on this formula in the Golden Bough. To determine his identity is a task of notable magnitude. What means are at the disposal of the inquirer? In a matter of such moment, it would be rash to rely upon the ordinary methods of divination, and in this particular case, astrology fails to afford even a suggestion. The letter of Frater 132 to Frater 666 on February 3, 1943, seems to supply a hint. The letter was written in a state of intense excitement, in vino veritas. Frater 132 himself seems to regard himself as a prophet of the law of Thelema, and even of Frater 666 himself, adulating that very humble brother in fantastically unbalanced and exaggerated language. If this were so, the fact would immediately manifest when Frater 132 begins to prophesy, but even so, no light is thereby cast upon the problem of his identity. 6. Frater 132, having hitherto been unconscious of his true nature, is plainly incompetent to announce offhand who he actually is in the celestial orders, and his tempestuous and thwarted career while in subjection to hallucination that he was human in the full sense, has presumably obfuscated his intelligence, and masked his countenance with 10,000 irrelevant but direful deceptive excrescences, as it were a handsome youth smeared with the ordure thoughts of Dachau. 7. It must therefore be his primary object to recognize himself. With this end in view, he must first of all withdraw completely from further occasion of contamination, and he must devise for himself, with such help as this essay may be able to render him, a true method of self-realization. This aim is, of course, that of initiation itself. But in the normal man, the self to be realized is altogether beyond identification with any person. It is universal, and identical for all of us, since ultimately we differ only as points in a boundless space. That is, by position, which is itself only recognizable by virtue of imperfection in the analysis. 8. In this case, Frater 132 has to realize and to proclaim his identity and function very much as Frater 666 regards himself in the light of what is spoken of him in the Book of the Law. He ought to be able to say very simply, I am Aput, or Habsanut, or Tum Esh Neith, or as may be the case. It will not serve the present purpose to accept Asar or Ra, or one of the universal gods, such as of whom all men are in a sense incarnations. It is not necessary that the god should have incarnated at or before the birth of Wilfred T. Smith. A quite possible significant moment might have been the summer solstice of 1916, EV, or during the winter of 09, when terrific forces were set in motion by the chiefs of the order. The child might well have been begotten by the Paris working, January 1914, or as a result of some of the immense Enochian invocations. In the latter case, the name of the god required might be found on the watchtowers of the universe, and his nature determined by analysis of the squares concerned. Another possibility suggested by the place of residence of Frater 132 is that of one of the aboriginal Red Indian gods may have seized the opportunity somehow afforded by Frater 132's state at the moment. 9. Do these suggestions conflict with the original thesis? Is the case rather one of permanent possession of a man by a god? This question recalls the phenomena observed in the late Frater Lampada Tredam, or Victor Neuberg, who became for periods on one occasion, it extended to 11 days, the vehicle of such deities as Isis, Jupiter, and Pan, also of obsessing demons, who were of course exorcised without delay, but often with extreme difficulty. During such times, Frater LT lost completely all his human characteristics, his awareness of the world about him, and lived in uninterrupted consciousness of the deity that was possessing him, and manifested the qualities of that Godhead in singular perfection, untainted, unalloyed by any corporate externalization of the vehicle. 10. The case of Frater 132 seems quite different. He appears almost continually thwarted, enraged, the imprisoned God chafing at his base confinement, in the human qualities, those rather of some animal than a man. Only in the ecstasy of the performance of his sacerdotal function in the Gnostic Mass, and when similarly freed by equivalent magical conditions, did Frater 132 exult in the fullness of his self-realization and freedom. But still, through failure to understand the true nature of the phenomenon, neither wholly satisfied with the present nor capable of manipulating the future. 11. The strategical attitude of the task which confronts Frater 132 is accordingly simple, clear, straightforward, and capable of being carried through to triumph on lines well known, well tried, and already proved applicable with satisfaction to and by Frater 132 himself. The problem may be succinctly stated as follows: to initiate himself to the point at which he may be classed in the hierarchy to which he belongs, so as to be recognizable by himself and by observers of adequate skill. 12. The further work of self-initiation up to the final resolution of the pantomorphous tensorial equation, naught equals 2 equals 1 equals many equals all, in alpha and omega dimensions, is clearly the business of the God himself to undertake, but it may be laid down on considerations of general principle that the first condition of its success must be that the God has perfectly fulfilled the particular purpose to execute which he embarked upon so extraordinary and hazardous an undertaking as to incarnate in human form. The true will of Wilfred T. Smith, or of Frater 132, is from alpha to omega identical with that of every other star. Videlicet to discover, understand, and enjoy his own original universal perfection by postulating it in terms of every possible imperfection in every possible dimension. But the true will at any given moment of any particular complex of imperfections is for the individual so composed to discover by the accepted formulae, and it is certain that to be balked of success in this next step is to be barred temporarily from attaining of the broader, deeper, and ultimate great work. 13. For the observer, therefore, who is bound by the oaths of the Great White Brotherhood to assist Frater 132 in his work, receiving in turn the benefit appointed, it will be especially useful to study the following sections of this essay. Section Gamma. The Captain, Ship's Discipline, Hints on Navigation. 1. It must appear of little real vantage to the divine tenant of any human mansion to be aware of the name assigned to him by his neighbors, or even by the man who shelters him, but from a shallow and temporary standpoint, it may well be for him to take measures that will ensure his proper treatment by, and even assistance from them. The problems of all concerned will be simplified if he be fitted with accurate appellation. He must be enabled to fulfill himself with the least possible friction. This implies a preparation and a safeguarding of the conditions of his incarnation. Thus, confident in reliance on the understanding, goodwill, and assistance of his appointed guardians, he must take the utmost pains to realize himself, to develop his nature so as to best carry out the purpose to accomplish which he has undertaken this rare and difficult form of strategy. 2. The divine nature must never be contaminated or cheapened by human associations. He must be seen and heard by his attendants only, except in actual ceremonial or when prophesying. The most difficult of all his tasks will be to establish proper relationship with those attendants. No man is a hero to his valet. But that is exactly what he must be, and he must achieve this simply, without artifice, pose, or superficial play upon the emotions of his guardians. 3. It should be most convenient for him to dwell in a tent or shack, preferably on some remote yet consecrated place, such as Temple Hill, where his food could be supplied from the neighboring GHQ of the SMMG, SG or SCMG, GJY, the Leffingwell's Desert Lodge with 50 acres of desert land, now called Rancho Royale. He would occupy himself in building, single-banded, a chapel or temple from the materials there abounding, or till his own garden, or both. 4. To emphasize the solemnity of his dedication in its irrevocable nature, it would be wise for him to cause the mark of the beast to be tattooed upon his forehead, or in the palm of his right hand. Also, if he choose, over his heart and upon his mons veneris. 5. He must always wear special robes appropriate to his nature and his work. A. Ceremonial vestments correct for his particular godhead. B. Working dress, the most convenient and comfortable for his daily life and work. C. Whatever robes may be proper for any ceremonial of the order in which he may be taking part. 6. Unassuaged of purpose. He must not make speeches designed to bring about any course of events in the outside world. His words must be utterances followed by silence. They must be confined to prophecies, definite outbursts of divine self-expression. There must be no reporting of these utterances and no writings on any sacred topic. He must train his personal attendants as Athos did Grimaud in the Three Musketeers, to understand his requirements with a minimum of speech. Arrangements must be made for a medical visit to Frater 132 at short intervals. 7. It may be that in order to fulfill his nature and mission, he must receive from time to time secret visitors. Such visits must be limited to a single aim, and while they last, all restrictions may be cancelled. The visit will have its own ceremonial amenities. But the purpose of the visit once attained, there is to be no repetition, nor, before that, any undue frequency. The error to be avoided is that the tendency to establish normal human relations with any person is compelling. It must be eschewed, as utterly fatal to his whole mission. Applications to visit him must be allowed or disallowed by Frater Saturnus himself, on his judgment of their propriety. Frater 132 must never on any account have any say in the matter. 8. Frater 132 is to formulate his own oath of the beginning. He is advised to submit a draft of this for the approval and suggestions of Frater 666. Frater 666 may revise the terms of the oath from time to time as Frater 132 develops. 9. There should be a period of preparation pending the full assumption of his dignity by Frater 132. These suggestions following may be of use. A. Frater Saturnus might appoint a local committee of 3 brethren to make the necessary practical arrangements. B. Frater 132 should continue to attune himself to the final regimen at once by making a great magical retirement, leaving alone and seeing no one except, say, 2 hours weekly conference with the committee to discuss minor problems that may arise in the course of the preparations. C. His main work will, of course, be to use such practices, invocations, etc., as will help him to establish his identity. Until this is discovered beyond all possibility of error, there is a risk of making plans which would conflict with that identity. E.g., King of Oreads would require a mountain dwelling, a king of Undines a lake, river, or seashore, a son of Demeter a grove, and so on for all. Nevertheless, the suggestions above put forward of Temple Hill as an abode, and the building of a chapel with garden as to the material side of the work, came spontaneously, and it may not be wholly without inspiration. D. During the period of preparation, it is of the greatest importance that no hint soever of the significance of the activities of those concerned should reach the outer world, and the strictest silence in respect of the matter should be most straitly enjoined upon every member of the order. Not even among themselves should it be mentioned, much less discussed. The sole exception to this rule, Frater 132 and the committee, and they, to the exact contrary, should discuss nothing whatever that does not appertain to the business of the preparations.